Hi there and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about the recent death of Odair Moniz at the hands of PSP agents and the riots which have ensued in many districts of Lisbon and beyond. First of all, I just want to set the scene by talking about the guy who was actually killed. Now, in many cases and in many media reports and posts online, I'm seeing the guy Odair Moniz described as being a victim of police brutality, etc., etc. And a lot of residents of the Zambojão neighbourhood where he lived in Lisbon have come out to say that he was a great guy, he was a father. Some people say he was the father of 2 children, other people say he was the father of 3 children. The information that I found online is that he has 3 children, aged 19, 18 and 2 years of age. He's also married and lives in the Zambojão area of Lisbon. Now, it's not surprising that when someone dies, people who know him will come out and say good things about him. And we've heard that in this case as well. People saying that he was a guy who helped the local residents association and he was polite, etc., etc. He was a local business owner having a cafe, and he also worked as a chef in a restaurant. That's another thing that I've heard. And basically the story that this guy was an ordinary citizen, an ordinary worker who was ruthlessly cut down by the police. But from the information that I've been able to uncover, I just can't see how people are describing this guy, Odair, as, some kind of model citizen, or I even heard him described as an example citizen by people. My God, he has been convicted for multiple crimes. He has a deep and storied criminal history, including things like armed robbery, other crimes of violence, and drug trafficking. So basically, this guy has been to prison before for these crimes. And I think describing him as a model citizen is really a stretch. It's also said by CNN that he had outstanding warrants for his arrest and he was being pursued by the police for that. Of course, I'm not sure of the veracity of that statement. Mr. Moniz had lived for approximately 2 decades in Lisbon and was resident in the Zambojão area of the city. It is unknown whether or not he was a Portuguese citizen, but I presume not, because he is described as being someone who came from Cape Verde. And the Cape Verdean ambassador has also intervened in the case with the Portuguese government, and they wouldn't normally do that in the case of dual citizens or when someone had acquired the nationality of the country in question. So I assume that he is not, in fact, a Portuguese citizen, although he has lived here for a very long time. One has to ask, why would that be the case? Certainly the language exam wouldn't be a barrier for him, and he's been here long enough. Perhaps it might have something to do with his criminal past. That would certainly be something which might prevent someone from becoming a Portuguese citizen. And you have to ask the question, as I'm asking myself, if this guy had such a deep criminal history as it appears that he has, as reported by CNN, then why is he still in Portugal? I mean, why was he here in the first place for these terrible events to happen? He should surely have been sent back to Cape Verde a considerable amount of time ago. And I'd just like to remind viewers, if you go to other countries, like for example, if you go to Thailand or Singapore or China or somewhere like that, and you do some of these things like drug trafficking or armed robbery, you would certainly be deported after a lengthy period in prison, and in some cases you would be lucky to escape with your life, because Thailand for sure executes drug traffickers. Now, in this particular case, what actually happened is not abundantly clear, but it appears that Mr. Moniz got in his car sometime in the early hours of the morning in an area of Lisbon, and he perhaps violated a traffic rule. It said in one report that he crossed a white line and he saw a police car and he decided to speed away in fright. The police gave chase, and Basically, he led them on a car chase for some time before he lost control of his vehicle, collided with several other cars, rendering his vehicle immobilized. He then fled from the car, and there was a chase on foot. The police managed to catch up with him, but he resisted arrest, and according to the police version of events anyway, shots were fired because Mr. Moniz was brandishing a bladed weapon. It is said in one report that it was a dagger, and it is claimed that there is video evidence that he was holding a dagger. And one policeman anyway fired 2 warning shots in the air, and Mr. Moniz did not desist from this behaviour, and the police officer in self-defence therefore fired 2 shots at Mr. Moniz. The consequences of the shooting were that Mr. Moniz was hit. There is some confusion about exactly where, but the majority of reports indicate that it was in the area of the chest and the armpit, with another shot in the stomach. There is confusion about exactly how many shots were fired. Some sources say 4, some sources say 3, some sources say 2. It doesn't really matter. The end result was the same. Mr. Moniz was shot and he ended up dead. He wasn't dead at the scene, but he was later taken to hospital where it was impossible to save his life. In terms of Mr. Moniz using a weapon and brandishing it at the police, there are of course conflicting reports about this. There are some people saying that the weapon was not in his hand, and there's even allegedly CCTV footage showing that his hands were raised and empty. But on the other hand, there is other footage showing that he maybe had a dagger. To be honest, I really don't know. Another version said that a bag containing a knife was later found, and it was possible that Mr. Moniz was reaching for the weapon from the bag, and the officer suspected that, and that may have given him cause to discharge his weapon in the case. Despite all of the contradictions in the reports, I think that everyone will agree that Mr. Moniz had a criminal past. Mr. Moniz had just led the police on a very dangerous car chase, which endangered not only himself and the officers, but pedestrians and other road users. Basically, very, very reckless behaviour, which easily could have resulted in the death or injury of others. And apart from that, it's not exactly the conduct of a reasonable, law-abiding citizen to flee from the police in his car and lead them on a high-speed chase through a densely populated neighbourhood, risking the lives of others. I mean, I think that needs to be said, because that is what this guy did. I mean, it's extremely socially dangerous behaviour. Forgetting everything else, the fact that he's prepared to do something like that and go on a high-speed car chase through the city really indicates that this is somebody who's very, very dangerous, and it's not really the kind of person that you want to fill your society with. It's certainly not the kind of person I would like to be living near. Also, I think the fact that a knife was found in his possession, whether it's in his bag or in his hand or whatever, doesn't indicate good things, When I go outside, I don't take a knife with me in my bag. I don't think that is the normal behaviour of a reasonable person. I mean, who does that? I think that the chances of this person being involved in criminal activity, given the fact that he has a knife with him, maybe a concealed weapon, and the fact that he has just run away from the police and led them on a high-speed chase, I think it's pretty strong, especially when you consider the criminal background of the individual in question. So if someone says to me, am I immensely sad that this person was shot by police in this kind of incident, I have to say that I am not. In my opinion, this person shouldn't have been in Portugal anyway after, the crimes that he's committed, and I'd like to know why. If someone commits serious crimes in the country, such as armed robbery, and armed robbery is pretty up there on the level of serious crimes, then it's a mystery to me how that person can then stay in the country. I mean, how does that work? Someone should really explain that to me. If I committed a serious crime of this nature, there's no way I would entertain the possibility of remaining in the country, or even that I could. It seems completely ludicrous to me. So in my estimation, what's happened here, regardless of the rights and wrongs of the police action, whether he had the knife exactly in his hand, or whether the policeman acted 100% according to the protocols of the police training on self-defense or whatever, I think bottom line, just disregarding everything else about the case, you have to say that the person who was shot in this incident is definitely not an angel. And probably not the kind of person that you would want to be living in a modern society. It's certainly not the kind of person that I would relish the prospect of living around. And therefore I have to be honest and say I don't really mourn his passing. Yes, there may have been some irregularities in the way that the police handled the case. The agents involved maybe have to face some consequences for the fact that they didn't follow proper processes. But who are we to put ourselves out here and say, you know, the police were wrong? They did something which is incorrect here. We weren't there. We have to wait for the evidence to emerge. And certainly if there is video surveillance imagery which shows that the guy had a knife and was coming at the police, then I think that's a very strong reason for him to be shot. And I don't think that we should be campaigning for the police officer to be indicted and fired and transferred and all of these kind of things. As far as I know at the moment, the police officer has not been transferred or dismissed or suspended or anything. He's still on active duty in his unit. And I think that that sends a good message actually from the PSP, that they're not going to listen to all of this criticism, much of which is completely unfounded. Much of which comes from the community who weren't there, who didn't see. There weren't witnesses to the event as far as I know. No one has come forward and said that they actually saw anything. Just the police officers who were involved themselves and some video camera surveillance. I think we need to wait for all of the facts to fully emerge before we condemn the police officers involved in this case. I don't think it's justifiable. And for organisations like SOS Racismo and Vida Justa to come out and basically say this is an example of police brutality, you know, they're victimizing the community, there's an atmosphere of persecution in these neighborhoods, I think it's totally unjustified. This was, at the end of the day, a dangerous criminal. Now, the circumstances of whether he was armed and, you know, whether the police officers responded correctly, those need to be investigated and fleshed out. But at the end of the day, he was a dangerous criminal and he was shot. It is not exactly a tragedy for society. Sadly and predictably, the death of this man has sparked a wave of rage in the community in which he lived, which was Zambojao, and beyond. There are many neighbourhoods of Lisbon and even beyond Lisbon in places like Setúbal and Cascais, Sintra that have reported disturbances, but most of the rioting is taking place in Lisbon and various neighbourhoods of Lisbon. Many of them are dominated by migrant communities, and when you look at the pictures, you can see that most of the people involved are probably from migrant backgrounds. I think that that is fair to say. We've seen things like bins, you know, in Portugal they have big plastic bins, green plastic bins, and they've been set on fire by the rioters. There are buses that have been basically hijacked with the driver and the passengers tossed out, and then the bus was stolen and then set alight. Several buses have been set on fire. The rioters have set up roadblocks with burning tires, and they're pouring petrol on the road to block it off. To the police. Police and firefighters have been pelted by stones and other missiles. There are reports of Molotov cocktails being used and even shots fired by the rioters. At least one woman has had her car destroyed by the rioters. That was actually a black woman and a private citizen, and she was understandably upset about it. And they also tried to set fire to a Repsol fuel station, which is just unimaginably dangerous. I mean, who sets fire to a station full of gasoline in the middle of the city? If it exploded, the devastation could be really, really terrible, and many innocent people could lose their lives. It's just immensely irresponsible and dangerous behaviour that really needs to be stopped. And these disturbances involve hundreds of people. I mean, the guys who hijacked the bus, there were about 20 of them, armed with Molotov cocktails. It's not small groups of 1 and 2. There are quite a lot of people involved, hundreds and hundreds in total. And some of them have even vowed on social media not to stop until they have successfully killed a Portuguese police officer in retaliation for the death of Mr. Moniz. Obviously, from my perspective, I think this is absolutely appalling. I think that the PSP and the police in general need to go into these neighbourhoods and they need to put down a really strong show of force. So far, I don't think that they have. There's only been 1 arrest. How can there have only been 1 arrest after all this is going on? What I see in a lot of the footage are riot police all kitted up, and they're kind of hanging back and watching rioters throw stones and burn things from a safe distance. I don't think that that's the way to go about it. Admittedly, there are cases where rubber bullets have been fired, and I'm not saying the police are taking no action. They're using drones and social media intelligence monitoring to try to identify people who are conducting violence and inciting violence online, which means that in the coming days and weeks, we're probably going to see more arrests. However, it would be nice to just see this stop and to see a very, very solid and massive armed police presence on the streets of these neighbourhoods with a zero tolerance policy aimed at stopping things now. The people who live there, the law-abiding citizens, and indeed all the people of Lisbon, even including tourists and visitors to the city, deserve the protection of the police, and it is intolerable that you can have this kind of thing going on. It has to be stopped, and it has to be stopped now. One rather amusing story from this is that the case of the police officer who fired the fatal shots has been referred to the prosecution as a potential case of murder, and one of the prosecutors was commenting on the case and talked about the riots. Of course, he said they're really, really bad. But, we also have the situation in many other, European countries as well. Portugal is not unique. Well, he got that right. Yeah, we do have this situation in many other European countries. And why is that? Well, let's speculate for a minute. Maybe it's because we filled neighbourhoods with people who come from third world countries. And you have such a concentration of these groups of people. And when they feel that they have been wronged in some way, they use the methods of the third world to come out and express their opinions. And if you look at what happens in Africa or the Middle East, when there's something that goes wrong, some kind of conflict between the population and authority, it's exactly the same thing. People come out and riot, they throw stones, they burn things, they burn vehicles, they attack the police. Exactly what we're seeing in Lisbon right now. It's basically the rule of the third world. You bring people, many, many people from developing countries into your country. You think that they're going to abide by the social norms and legal framework of the country that's receiving them, but that's just an illusion. In actuality, sadly, many of these immigrants bring the ideas of how to conduct themselves that they had in their home countries, for example, in Cape Verde or in Angola or in Mozambique or in Central Asia or wherever they come from. They bring them to Europe. And the result is terrible. I mean, we just talked about another form of this in Alentejo with young Central Asian males, basically following school children and pestering them for sex. It's just another example of this kind of conduct. In my estimation, many of these people think that they are somehow shielded from criticism because they can say, oh, you're racist. They can point the finger at anyone who accuses them of misconduct and say that they are a racist force. And of course, there will always be apologists for any kind of conduct, such as SOS Racismo that we saw in this case. And those guys, those leftists, are going to come out and they're going to say, oh, we need to understand, this is the reality. These people are persecuted. They need special treatment. No, if they live in Europe, if they live in Portugal, they need to abide by Portuguese law and they need to follow the social norms that we have here in Portugal and here on the European continent. We can, under no circumstances, surrender to the idea that these people are perpetual victims, and for that reason they need some kind of special care and attention, and they're not subject to the same laws and regulations as everybody else, and it's okay for them to riot if they feel unhappy. Absolutely not. We need to crack down hard, and we need to send a message that here in Europe things are different. And if an immigrant comes to Europe and wants to settle in Europe, then it is absolutely imperative that that person accepts this idea. They accept the idea of the rule of law and that they are subject to the same kinds of norms of behaviour as everybody else. They're not a special case and they can't always play the race card to get away with any kind of misdemeanour that they want to. That is my opinion, at least. So that'll do it for this video. I hope people found it interesting and informative. Please let me know in the comments below what you think about this case. What is the right and wrong of it? Do you support the actions of the police? And what do you think about the conduct of the rioters? I will be interested to hear your opinions. And I will see you all in the next video very soon.